People still love to listen to music on vinyl. For bands, indie artists, and small labels, vinyl is a fantastic way to recoup the cost of recording an album or touring. That said, mastering for vinyl is a valuable skill set to have as an engineer. Whether you're the mixing engineer and you want to know what works best for the engineer that you hand the project to, or you're wondering if you need separate masters for vinyl production, let's take a look at this in depth. So today's video is mastering for vinyl, everything you need to know. First off, we have a brief overview of vinyl mastering. So for those of you who want info quickly, here are the main points that we'll cover in more detail as the video progresses. First, the master or masters made for streaming can be used for vinyl production, but it's not ideal. Many of the choices made with streaming in mind will negatively impact the print quality. Second, the loudest the master should be is -12 LUFS. Any higher, and the needle will likely distort during playback or need to be adjusted before printing, resulting in a truncated dynamic range. Third, aside from classical music, the lows up to about 100 Hz should be made mono with a gradual filter. Otherwise, the needle will likely skip or jump out of the groove. 4. Sibilance isn't tolerated as well on vinyl, meaning de-essing during mastering might be necessary. Point 5. RMS and peaks need to be controlled. Great changes in dynamics can cause the needle to skip. And lastly, number 6, softer songs with less high-frequency info are best if they're saved for the middle of the record. First up, let's discuss issues with using the streaming master and heavy limiting. So when mastering for streaming, heavy limiting and clipping are often used, mainly to get the level to -10 LUFS or higher. Both limiting and clipping cause distortion, with the latter causing significantly more. Now by its nature, increased distortion occurs during the playback of a vinyl record, meaning a heavily distorted master will only sound more distorted when it's printed. Now, if you were to use the master that was made for streaming for this process, the engineer that's printing the record will make some needed changes, including reducing the gain of the track to suit the medium better. Whereas a heavily limited and clipped master can work well in streaming, most of the perceived benefit will be lost when preparing the master for vinyl. So you're losing dynamics, you're adding distortion, and likely altering the frequency response, all for that engineer to turn it down out of necessity. Furthermore, a good deal of harmonic distortion created from limiting and clipping will occupy the high mids and the highs, an area that needs to be carefully controlled to avoid unpleasant distortion during vinyl playback. So you might save some time or money, but simply put, your record won't sound as good as it can for anyone who purchases the vinyl. Next, let's discuss mono lows. Controlling the stereo width of low frequencies is a good idea in just about any master if you want a driving and focused low end, but it becomes a necessity when working with vinyl. The needle moves laterally for mono information and vertically for stereo information. Low frequencies, having the majority of the energy in a track, will cause aggressive vertical cuts or dips if they occupy the side image or have differing information between the left and right channels. As the playback needle moves across these large dips, it could jump out of groove. This is especially problematic for genres with heavy bass or kick, like pop, EDM, hip-hop, etc. There are multiple ways to do this, but I believe a gradual high-pass filter on the side image is the best method. Depending on how aggressive the lows are, use either a 6 dB per octave or a 12 dB per octave filter on the side image, and at the highest, set it to 100 Hz. Now in the past, I believed a higher setting was necessary, but it appears that today's turntables are capable of handling some more variation in the low mids. Now since we've used a slope filter and not a hard cutoff, the more problematic frequencies will have more attenuated from the side image, whereas the lows that pose less of a problem won't be cut as aggressively. Now classical music typically doesn't need this filter due to its lower overall amplitude and less energy in this region, but if the composition has aggressive lows in the side image, a subtle cut might be needed. Now real quick, Sage Audio is an analog mastering studio. We've been around for 20 years, and mastering starts at $49 a track. There's a link in the description and a longer ad at the end of the video if you're interested in learning more. But next up, let's discuss sibilance and distortion. Now controlling sibilance is a surprisingly important aspect of mastering for vinyl. To explain why, let's take a look at this RIAA-EQ curve. When cutting a track onto vinyl, something similar to a tilt filter is used. The lows are attenuated greatly, while the highs are amplified. This helps the needle, which is less sensitive to high frequencies, properly cut these hard-to-replicate frequencies. However, if the highs are too aggressive before this tilt filter, and too aggressive of a level is fed into the needle, we get distortion. During playback, the opposite curve is applied to ensure a flat response. However, the distortion is already embedded into the vinyl. Any duplications of this original cut will have the same distortion. Now, this is why controlling sibilants, cymbals, or any other high amplitude, high frequency instrument is important, both during mixing and mastering. On the mastering side of things, using a low distortion, frequency specific compressor is the best option. Now, I enjoy this Weiss DS1 Mark III, in particular the de-esser that's bundled in with it and uses its algorithm. You'll achieve smooth sounding de-essing more often than not. However, a soft knee, moderate ratio, and slightly longer release will ensure that the sibilance is reduced while minimal distortion is introduced. Alternatively, a multi-band dynamics processor is also a good option, so long as you can ensure that the majority of the peak is attenuated without adding distortion and while retaining the original timbre of the track, then you should be fine. Up next, let's cover great changes in dynamics. Now, this is similar to our side image low frequency issue, but it presents itself differently. In short, drastic changes in dynamics cause drastic changes in the lateral movement of the needle, although vertical changes can also occur if the side image is high enough in amplitude. Now, during playback, a consumer-grade needle might skip if it's shifted too greatly. Now, you might think this only applies to individual tracks, but it's usually the transition from one song to the next that causes this problem. If a song fades out and the next starts with a massive hit or large dynamic shift, this might be enough for the needle to skip. A solution might be to alter the sequencing of the tracks, but a better option is to use low distortion RMS compression to help control dynamics. Since I'm not relying on limiting for controlling dynamics when mastering for vinyl, an RMS compressor mixed with subtle peak down compression is a great combination for controlling dynamics. 1 dB of RMS attenuation and 1 to 1.5 dB of peak down attenuation will be enough to keep large lateral or vertical cuts from occurring. Additionally, this amount of compression shouldn't be too audible and won't greatly impact the perceived dynamics of the master. Last up, let's cover track sequencing. Now, I find this to be the most interesting part of mastering for vinyl. As the needle moves around the record during playback, its speed remains the same. However, the circumference of the disc is reduced the closer the needle gets to the center. This results in a lower velocity near the record center and a lowered ability for the needle to reproduce high frequencies. On the outside of a 12-inch record, the needle is moving about 20 inches per second. By the time it's at the center, it's about 8.5 inches per second. Subsequently, from the outside of the disc to the inside, there's a drop of 3 dB for 15 kHz and above. If the track is cymbals, high-order harmonics and overtones, airy reverb, or any defining factor that occupies the highs, there will be a noticeable drop in amplitude. With that in mind, many artists choose to put softer songs toward the record center, maybe an acoustic track that mainly occupies the lows and the mids. Alternatively, you could boost the highs of the track that you know will be sequenced toward the center, but as we covered earlier, this might cause unwanted distortion. The best solution, but perhaps the most costly, is to create a shorter runtime for each side of the record. The highs will be retained up to about 18 minutes on a 12-inch record. Up to about 22 minutes still sounds good, but anything longer than that and you'll run into issues. So, if your album is longer than 44 minutes, it might be best to either cut a song, create a shorter version of a song, or create a double disc LP. Get professional analog mastering that accurately translates what you hear in your head. Seriously though, when people work with us, they get results. That's why major industry professionals like Keith Urban's producer Aaron Schurz works with us, Grammy award-winning AJ Castillo, Billboard #1 charted artist Megan Lindsay, Grammy award-winning artist Tulis, The Voice singer Cody Ballou, Grammy-nominated producer Tyler Kane, Warner Music artist Ricky Young, and the list goes on. Why waste your time creating masters that don't accurately translate what you hear in your head when you could instantly fix a problem by clicking the link in the description and working directly with professionals who have already done what you're trying to do? We've mastered thousands of songs that accurately translate what each client hears in their head, and it'll work for you too. Click the link in the description now and get direct access to us for personalized analog mastering that accurately translates what you hear in your head.